motorboat put across the ocean. And I'm afraid that's what we give God too many times. God calls us to something, and all we say is, oh, but God, oh, but God, oh, but God. Like a bad low motorboat who can't get started. We jump in to action only after we can't find a way out of it so often. God sometimes asks us to do difficult things. In fact, God will never ask you to do something that you can do by yourself. He's not asking you to do human-sized things. He's asking you to do God-sized things. And the thing is, the only way you can do that is to allow Him to do them through you. See, when God calls you and gives you a task, He expects you to let Him work through you. So often we get it all messed up and we think, well, God's told me to do this and I've got to do it on my own. And we're going to look today at an example of somebody who did just that. The guy's name is Moses. Now, most of you know who Moses is. Most of you have heard the story of Moses. A lot of you know how he got where he was. You know that his mommy, they were executing Jewish boys. Any baby boy who was born by the Jewish slaves in Egypt was to be executed so that they could cut down on the population, because the Pharaoh was afraid of the Jewish slaves. And of course that didn't work, and finally his mother had a child, had a son, and they called him Moses. And so they put him in a basket while his sister watched, and they put it down so the Nile, the princess of the kingdom, the Pharaoh's daughter, would find him, and she drew him out of the water. In fact, that's what Moses means, is drawn out of the water. He was drawn out of the water. And Moses was adopted by the Pharaoh, and then she hired a nurse to take care of her. And of course that nurse was his real mom. So basically she was being paid by the princess to care for her own son. So we know a little bit of the story, and we know that he grew up and eventually he got into trouble. And so, the reality is that he tried to do it on his own. So when we encounter Moses at this point, in Exodus 3:11, Moses is tending the flock of Jethro, his father, who was a priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it did not burn. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses. And Moses said, Here am I. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And God, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face, because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way of the Egyptians are oppressing them. So go now, for I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out? When we reach the events captured in this chapter, Moses is already about 80 years old. He's had a very interesting 80 years. He spent his first 40 years in the palace. He was used to being the mighty way by God to deliver he thought he was going to be the mighty way of God to deliver the Israelites. He's going to do it in his own strength. Moses tried to do it all on his own, without waiting for God. So after he kills an Egyptian, he has to run away into the desert and go into hiding. And he spends the next 40 years as a shepherd. Now he's 80 years old. He's an old man when the events of Exodus chapter 3 start. He has spent the last 40 years thinking he's a failure. He was a member of the most powerful and most wealthy family in the country. He had been trained and prepared to be the leader of nations. But his efforts to free the Israelites was a huge failure, and he had to run for his life. So 40 years, he was no longer a royal prince. He no longer led armies and men. He is now the leader of a flock of sheep. He no longer had wealth and power. Instead, he was becoming a simple man. He had become a simple man, living a quiet life in the countryside. He's given up all those thoughts of grandeur, and he's content. He's comfortable. He's probably ready to retire and take it easy. And then he sees this bush. It's on fire, but not burning up. And Moses goes to check it out. I mean, that would be amazing. God calls out to him, it's time to deliver the people of Israel out of slavery. Moses, I'm sending you. Now, until God got to that part about I'm sending you, I'm sure Moses was excited. All right, yes, God, I'm so glad you're going to save my people. And then God says, oh, let me drop the other shoe. I'm sending you to do it, Moses. It's time to get going, Moses. God reaches out and calls him into action. Wouldn't you be excited? Instead of being excited that Moses is calling him into active service, Moses makes one excuse after another. As we look at how Moses responded to God's call, let's examine ourselves. Where are we in all this? Maybe the world doesn't see much from us because we're hiding out like Moses and making excuses instead of jumping into action. Faith without works is dead. So let's look at Moses' 5 excuses. Well, God says, okay, Moses, I'm sending you. Moses says, oh, but God, God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Now here's the funny part. He didn't think he was up to the challenge. That wasn't the case 40 years earlier when he was younger and stronger and a prince. But now, after 40 years of chasing sheep around the desert, he feels that being Israel's deliverer was just too much for him. He's already tired in his own and failed. People of Israel have already rejected him. He's just a tired old man. How could Moses possibly take on such a huge task? The Bible doesn't say specifically, but I can imagine Moses thinking something like, well, God, I'm just a simple country shepherd. You should have called me 40 years ago. I was qualified for the job back then, but now I'm just an old, tired nobody. I'm useless. Let me ask you this. Do you think God gets more glory when he works through an unqualified nobody or when he works through a highly qualified somebody that everyone already expects to succeed? You think God gets more glory when a multi-million-dollar megachurch sends missionaries around the world or when a little bitty church sends missionaries? Gives all they can. God's answer to Moses is in verse 12. God wasn't at all concerned whether or not Moses was qualified. Instead, God said, hey, I got the answer for that. Here's why it doesn't matter if you're qualified. I will be with you. And just to prove it to you, Moses, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God in this mountain. God doesn't tell him to slowly work his way back into the political scene in Egypt, to work his way, go through the ranks, and rebuild his reputation so he could have a shot at the audience with the Pharaoh. He doesn't tell him that his problem is low self-esteem, that he just needs to pick himself up by his bootstraps and to carry himself with an air of confidence. Who am I? It really wasn't the right question. See, the problem didn't matter who he was. The problem is, who was God? God's identity is more important than who Moses is. It doesn't matter what God has called you to do or to endure or how impossible it may seem. You can do it if you trust in who God is. When you know that God is who is with us, I can go forward confidently and do his will because he's doing it through me. I'm not having to do it. Have you sensed God maybe calling you to something? And you're saying, oh, no, God, I'm not qualified for that. I'm too busy. Thinking things like, who am I? I'm not qualified to do that. I'm just a nobody. If I ignore it, maybe somebody else will take care of it. Maybe the pastor will step in and do it, or so I won't have to. After all, isn't that what we're paying him for? Stop focusing on yourself and what you think you can do. What was God called you to do? Has he called you to be bold and share your faith? Has he called you to love your enemies? We've already been called to do these things and many other things if you're a believer in Christ. But maybe he's called you to something like leave your home and invest your life in reaching unreached people. Maybe he's called you to start a Bible study in your home or invite your lost co-workers. Whatever it is, are you thinking God has laid something on your heart, but you're resisting because you don't feel qualified? Again, God says, I don't call you unless I tell you I'm going with you. When God says he'll be with you, he means it. Do you really trust him? If so, you'll do whatever he asks you to do, no matter what the cost, because you know that he's the one doing it through you. See, Moses' first excuse is the same excuse so many of us have. Well, I'm not qualified to do that. When God first called me into the ministry, that was my answer. Well, God, how could I possibly? I'm quiet, I'm shy, nobody laugh. I'm quiet and I'm shy and I don't talk well in front of people, and how am I going to do this, God? There's just no way. I mean, I'm not that kind of person. I can't be a pastor. And that was my excuse, and I kept telling God, God, look, let me do this. So I figured I'd get somebody else to agree with me, and then God, that would let me off the hook, right? Oh God, I can't do this. And so I went and talked to my youth pastor, the guy I grew up with. I went in his office. He had this old beat-up couch because he's a youth pastor, so they always get second-hand furniture. It's like a rule. And so he's sitting in his office, and I went in there. Can I talk to you a minute, Dan? And sat down on the couch. And before I got a word out edgewise, he looks at me and he says, "Oh, Michael, you know what? I've been meaning to talk to you. God has laid it on my heart that he's called you into the ministry." I didn't get to tell him that God said I'm not qualified. I didn't get a chance. God didn't give me an opportunity to make an excuse. Your pastor looks at me and says, "Well, God's calling you." Wait a minute. How is it he's calling me and he told you? Man, I need a chance to make an excuse. Oh, I wasn't done yet. I still try. Fine. Youth pastor, I'll go to the pastor. He's the big guy. He'll tell me the truth, and that way I know that, I won't have to worry about this. Made an appointment with him to see it the next day. Came in his office. I didn't even get the door open. "Oh, Mike, I'm so glad to tell you, God has been sharing with me that he's called you to be a pastor." I just shut my mouth. I said, "Okay, God, no more excuses. I'll do what you call me to do. But you got to do this, because there ain't no way I can do this." And he said, "I didn't plan for you to do it. I just want you to be a usable vessel that I can use." And just the same thing for you. God doesn't expect you to do it on your own. God doesn't expect you to be super saints or, to be... No. He says, if I call you to something, it's God-sized. And the only one that can do it is God. And so, Moses, I'm calling you. You go. Now, if Moses had been smart, like some of us, like many of us aren't, he'd have stopped right there and says, "Well, you know what? God's with me. I don't need anything else." No. See, Moses really, really didn't want to go. So he looks at it and says, "Well, but God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them?" And Moses said to God, and 40 years before this, Moses had plenty of authority as a prince of Egypt, but now he's nobody. How does he go to the Israelites and expect them to take him seriously? He had rejected him as a deliverer of their nation once already. Why should they change their mind now? Moses claims to be come from the Israelites as a representative of God, and surely God must have given his name to Moses. After all, when God was speaking the days of the patriarchs, he was of course associated with a newly revealed name of title for God. Genesis 14, he is the God Most High. Genesis 17, he's the Almighty God. Genesis 21, he's the everlasting God. Genesis 22, he's the Lord will provide. So if Moses were to come to the elders of Israel as a representative of God, it would be logical for them to wonder, by what name did he reveal himself to you? Let's see how God responds in verse 14 and 15. So God says to Moses, "I am who I am." And this is what you're to say to the Israelites, "I am has sent me." And God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation." So God is essentially saying, I have no equal. I am who I am. I have always been, I will always be, and I will continue to be God. I created all things. I have made a promise to my chosen people. I have promised to be their God. Moses, tell them my name is Yahweh, which is I am who I am, the great I am. Moses and the Israelite knew the name Yahweh. God did not give Moses a previously unknown name for himself, but the name they had known before. God called them back to the faith of the patriarchs. After all, Yahweh is God's covenant name. That is the name that he called himself when he made his covenant with Abraham. Moses wasn't going to be sent in some speak to his own behalf. He's being sent to speak under the authority of Yahweh. Tell them the great I am has sent you, and they'll listen. Now, Moses, are you not listening here? Because this is the name forever, and they're going to listen to you. When they hear this, they're going to listen. So, you look at it and like, okay, God, he's telling you he's going with you. And they're going to listen to you when you tell them. We sometimes forget that we're not sent out to speak on our own authority. We speak with the authority of the great I am. At the time of Matthew 28, Jesus said that all authority was given to him. So therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. We are sent out under the authority of Christ. We are sent out, we are called out, because God goes with us and God gives us his authority to do it. 2 Corinthians 5:20, the apostle writes, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though we are making his appeal through us. Start speaking under the authority of Jesus, and God will provide the fruit. I have news for you. You can come up with all the excuses you want, but understand that God is with you, and number two, that God gives you his authority. And even after all this, Moses comes up with another excuse. Oh, but God. What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Now, God doesn't answer any of these excuses. In case you haven't figured that out, he doesn't directly answer them. He just points out truths. But if I was God, fortunately for you, I'm not, but I think I would have gone back and said, Moses, were you not listening? What did I just say in that last verse? They will listen. Are you calling me a liar? Or were you just not listening? You're so worried about obeying me that you're going to call God a liar. Don't we do that? Don't we assume that God tells us he's going to send you to do something? Oh no, God, it can't be you. It's got to be me. I've got to do this, God. You need to tell me that. You need to give me the answer. You need to give me more signs. You need to prove it to me that you're calling me to this. Okay? I hear what you're saying, God, but I don't think it won't work. Because even though you told me they'll listen, they're not going to believe me. They're not going to listen. All Moses could see was the problems, the obstacles. He was having a hard time that believing what God was telling him was really going to happen. Moses has already failed in a big way. Why should he put himself in a position to possibly fail again and be rejected a second time? Most likely, none of us like being rejected either. So God gives Moses a different miracle or signs of his power. He turns a staff into a snake and back into a staff again. He covers Moses' hand with leprosy and heals it. He takes some water, pours it on the ground, and turns it into blood. Now, God's answer to Moses, what is in your hand? And he said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground and it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it. The Lord said to Moses, put your hand down and catch it by the tail. So being obedient, he put his hand down, caught it by the tail, and it turned immediately back into a staff. That they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. And again the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, and behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, put your hand back into your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter one. And if they do not believe even those two, or listen to your voice, you will take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. See, the reality is, God's already told them they're going to listen. But God says, look, I mean, the miracles are not for the people. They're really not for the elders. It's really not about them. This is about showing Moses that he can trust God. This is God being patient. A lot more patient than he really deserved. Because all he's got is that motorboat running going, but. See, our problem is God calls us, God tells us to do something, and we look at him and say, well, I don't believe you, God. That's what you're saying. When God says, do this, and you say, no, I'm not doing it, I don't trust you. That's exactly what you're saying. God, I don't believe you. God, you're a liar. God, I don't trust you. I know this is what God's calling me to do, but it won't be effective. It's not going to work. They won't believe me, and so why should I do it? But just like Moses and Jonah and David and Peter, God still calls us and wants to use us for his glory. Make no mistake, God will be glorified. It's just that sometimes he's glorified in spite of us as we make excuses and drag our feet. But wouldn't it be so much nicer if God was glorified because of us through our faithful obedience to his call? Excuse number 4. And God said, I will be with you, Moses. I am sent you. They'll listen, Moses. I'm sending you with miraculous signs, Moses. Moses still doesn't want to obey God's call. Which takes us to excuse number 4. Oh, but God, pardon your servant. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. And God said to him, hey, Moses. See, tempted is Moses says, who told you it was you? You're not listening to the part where I said, I will go with you. I've already given you a sign that you're mine. I've already given you a call. I'm going to do all of it. You don't have to do any of this, but you're worried about being eloquent. And he looks at it and says, Moses, okay, who gave human beings their mouths? Was it you? Well, who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will help you speak and teach you what to say. Let's remember, the Lord is not asking Moses for help. God is sending Moses. This is an assignment. So Moses uses an excuse that is very popular for many Christians. Lord, I'm just not qualified to do that. If Moses' case, he didn't feel that he was a gifted speaker. God has blessed each one of us with different gifts and spiritual abilities. And each one of us is gifted in varying degrees. Yet it is important to know that God has equipped you to do. It is a mistake to think that God will only call you to do things that you're good at doing. He doesn't call you to do human-sized things. He calls you to do God-sized things. Oh God, I'm not gifted. I can't speak. My grace is sufficient for you, and my strength is made perfect in weakness. Look, Moses, I created you already. I already know what you can and can't do. Just go. I'm going with you. Just obey. Just do what I tell you to do. Because my grace is sufficient for you, and my strength is made perfect in weakness, just like you and me. God says, I've called you to this. And no, it doesn't make sense, but you know what? I'm the one that called you, and if I called you, I'm going to provide the ability to do it. I'm going to provide the means to do it. Bruce Wilkerson was a Christian pastor, young and naive. God said, Bruce, I want you to go to New York City, and I want you to minister to the gangs there, the street gangs, the murderers, the criminals. And I want you to use the gifts I've given you as pastor of this little Midwestern country church where everybody's the same, to minister to this diverse group of people and lead them to Jesus. And Bruce could have said, oh, but God, I'm not qualified to that. I've never done that before. I don't have any experience doing that. And God, he didn't say that. He said, okay, God, I'm going. Anyway. Because Bruce was faithful. Because he didn't argue with God. He didn't debate God. He didn't try to run the other way. You know what happened? A young man was led to Jesus. His name was Nicky Cruz. Nicky was the head of the Bloods, or was it Crips? It doesn't matter. He was head of one of the most notorious gangs in the city. They dealt drugs, prostitutes, you name it, they did it. It was a violent, violent group. They tried everything to stop Bruce from witnessing to them, just sharing their faith. Bruce didn't say, well, when I'm from Iowa, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to relate to these people. He said, no, God called me to do this. I'm going to do it. You know what? It's because it was God doing it. He took a shy little teenager. And you got this. Not because I can do this. This is God's doing. God is the one who's gifted me. God is the one who's enabled me. God's the one who called me. And God's the one who leads me. And I can't do this on my own. And I won't try. If I thought for one moment that God said, no, I wash my hands of you, you're on your own, we would have to close down the church or find somebody else to pastor. But I can't do this. But God can. And since God called me here, He's the one that's got to tell me to leave. My grace is sufficient for you, Mike. My strength is made perfect in your weakness. And He will take care of the rest. We don't have to do anything other than let Him do it. And then Moses' last excuse, he says, oh, but God, but God, send someone else. I don't want to do this, God. I just out and out reject your call. Just send somebody else. You don't need me anyway. I'm useless. I'm worthless. Why would you want me? Oh, but God, I just don't want to do it. Moses finally reveals really what's at his heart of all these excuses. I just don't want to do it. I'm an old man. I'm tired. I don't want to have to mess with this. Send somebody else. God, surely someone else would do a better job. Please don't move me out of my comfort zone. Force me to take up something that I'm not comfortable with. So many of us, that's what we do. Oh, God, I'm comfortable here. I don't want to be moved out of my comfort zone. I don't want to be pushed. And God says, I didn't tell you, you get a choice. I called you, you obey. So Moses refuses to trust God, refuses to obey God's call. And the next verse, we see he makes God very angry. And yet, even though the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, he said, is there not Aaron? Look, I'm going to send somebody else. I'm going to send Aaron to be your voice. And so Moses finally submits to God's will, dragging and kicking and screaming. However, I am convinced as a leader, I am convinced Moses lost something in that last little anger. Because I'm going to tell you what, until that point, God said, I'm going to let you trust me. I'm going to give you the ability. I'm going to give you the words to say, you don't need anybody else to do this. You've got me. And he says, okay, Moses, you refuse to do it on your own. I'm sending Aaron to help you, and so you can do it with Aaron. The anger of the Lord burned against Moses, and he said, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you both what to do. He shall speak your mouth, and you shall be as God to him, and I will take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs. But Moses, I'm tired of fighting this. I'm tired of arguing this. I'm taking a reward. And that's exactly what he did. I think right there sowed the seeds for Moses' problems while he was moving the Israelites. Because there's a little factor that people don't seem to realize. When you're leading somebody and you rebel against God and you refuse to do what he calls you, you set the example for everybody else around you. But here's what's really important. The encounter enabled Moses to obey God no matter what. I mean, here he is. He's making all these excuses. He's arguing with God. And Moses says, you know what? Moses encountered God. and it changed him. Look, this is the same Moses who made all those excuses. Listen to this. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, but he endured as seeing him who was invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. I want you to think about this. Is the same Moses says, oh, but God, send somebody else. But God, I can't speak. But God, why me? But God. Same Moses. Hebrews 11. And this is the guy who struck the rock and brought water to give the people Israelite water, who sat in the very presence of God, and when he came down from the mountain, he had been so close to God for so long that he actually glowed in the dark. He scared the Israelites so badly that they made him cover his face so they couldn't see the glow, because he had been in the presence of God. This is the same Moses, all these excuse-making Moses, who led the Israelites through the wilderness for 40 years. The same Moses who, when the people complained about being tired of the manna, they wanted meat, God gave them quail. This is the same Moses when the Israelites decided they were tired and afraid, and they made an altar and made a statue. Same Moses came down from the highlands, from the Holy Land, from the mountain, from God's presence, and talked God into not destroying Israelite altogether. The same guy who God trusted so much that he gave him the 10 Commandments. That's the same Moses. He wasn't perfect, but you know what? His encounter changed him. It didn't happen instantly, and like many of us, we encounter God and it doesn't happen overnight. Not one of us here encountered God and suddenly became a 100% different person the next day. It doesn't happen. But you know what it did? We can make excuses and we can refuse to obey. When we choose to obey, we get to see God work. You know what? Isn't that an amazing thought? When you don't make excuses, when you follow Him, even if it means you go in kicking and screaming, you get to see God at work. And when we encounter God, we learn to obey God no matter what. And every time we do that, every time we encounter Him, every time it changes us just a little bit. Moses had years to learn that God was trustworthy. God reminded him all the time. The next 40 years. He didn't get to go into Israel. He didn't get to go into the Holy Land because he disobeyed God. But he learned that God could be trusted, and God did what He said. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea on dry land. This is the same Moses who said, "Oh, but God, I can't do this." "Oh, but God," held the staff up so the Israelites could cross over on dry land. When they all got to the other side, God drowned the fleeing army. See, we can make excuses and we can refuse to obey God, and God will just make us go through it again and again and again and again. Because one of the other principles in Scripture is if God calls you to something and you refuse to do it, it's going to get harder, but He's going to eventually get you to do it. Don't think so? I have news for you. God says, you know what, I called you to this, you're going to do it. If I have to make you do it over and over and over again till you finally get it right, I'll make you do it over and over again. So I can choose to, when I encounter God, I can turn to obey God no matter what, or I can ignore Him. When I encounter Him, it will change me forever, and it will continue to change me again and again and again. And yeah, I may have to go through this process with God for the rest of my life, but every time He does it, I change. Here's the best part. When he encountered God, it wasn't just so that God could say, I met you. It wasn't just to give Moses a thrill. It was because he was getting ready to use Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And when you encounter God, that means that if you obey him and you trust him and you say, God, yes, I'll be that person, God will say, I'm preparing to use you. I'm preparing to do something that you wouldn't believe if I told you. That's the best part. No matter what you think, no matter what you say, God says, look, I got this under control. You just need to obey me. Let me handle it. You don't need to. We are a transformed people. We've encountered the living Christ and it's changed us. That's a mark of encountering it. Like Jacob, we walk away. Maybe we've been injured by the encounter and we're changed by it. Like Moses, he's changed. His whole nature, his whole character begins to change. Just like us. When we're in a relationship with Jesus Christ, we begin to grow. We begin to change. We're no longer the same people we were. I know I'm not. So my question for you guys is, are you willing to serve him? Let him equip you to serve him. You may not have a natural talent or be gifted in a particular area, but God has called you to a particular work. He will give you everything you need to do it, and he will produce fruit through your faithful obedience. So which is it? Are you saying, yes, God, here I am. Yes, God, I'll obey. Or are you saying, no, but God, are you making excuses? Do you want to go where he wants you to go, or are you making excuses as to why you can't trust him? You want to be greatly used of God? You must be willing to follow wherever he leads. And it's time to stop hiding behind the excuses we have so good at making. It's time to stop resisting and to start following. It's time to stop talking about faith. And it's a time to start living it out. What has he called you to? Let's close in prayer. Oh, Father, we're so good at making excuses. Oh, but God, but you accept no excuses. You know the reality. You know our very thoughts. Nothing is hidden from you. It doesn't matter what the security gate says. It doesn't matter what the wall says. You see all. Thank you, Father. In your most precious Son's name. Amen. And my prayer, something we said had an impact. You heard God's voice in this. And know that he's calling you. I don't know what he's calling you to. But stop giving him excuses. Just say, yes, God. Yes, God, this is what you've called me to do, and this is what I intend to do. And it doesn't really matter what my circumstances are. It doesn't matter what my talents or lack of talents is. You called me. That's all I need to know. Go out there and be the church, folks. Go live a transformed life, just like Moses. Be transformed. God bless you. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I pray that you have a blessed week and a blessed weekend. Don't forget, we have service tomorrow at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. SLT times. And so I look forward to seeing you again. I pray that you have a great week if you're not able to make it back here on either one of the Sunday services. God bless. Virginia, Bonnie, Mia, the cat, Morgan. Did I miss anybody? And all the people, all the ships that say, no, I'm sorry, sorry. All you guys on live stream. God bless you.